When we think about the Mongols today, at least for those of us who are not professional historians but are interested in history of the region, Mongols continue to be a puzzle because the literature that has come out kind of paints them as, and I hope I'm not going to be offending you, but my reading of the literature has always been that there was this one great man called Genghis Khan, and he conquered the world, and then they disappeared from the history. So when I came across your book, when it came out, and of all the publications where I read a great review of this was the Financial Times. That had me thinking that I should get this book. So I got the book, I read it, and then it suddenly, a lot of my misconceptions or ideas about history as I knew it were shattered because you trace a macro history with a micro perspective, which is very hard to do. So my first question to you is, how hard was it to synthesize all of this together? You've spoken in various interviews about the different languages, the different perspectives, but it's a book about a specific part of the Mongol Empire, the Golden Horde, but then it begins with a larger global historical perspective. So, how hard it is to do?
Thank you for your question. And first of all, thank you for inviting me, Professor Rai. I'm so happy and glad to share with you my research and the research I've done for this book. So indeed, it was a challenge for me because first of all, this research I started more than 20 years ago. Even when I was a master's student, I started being interested. So in Golden Horde, which is the western part of the Mongol Empire, as you said, also the northern part. So it covered most of Russia today, a great part of Central Asia. It's very important for Kazakhstan. It's also very important if you look at Eastern Anatolia, Caucasus, and even Eastern Europe, which is something I discovered later. So, I mean, Europe is involved in this story, right? So my point was give the big picture, certainly, but also to, how can I put that? Like give flesh, like give stories of people, because it's very hard to make, for instance, even my students understand what happened if there are no real characters, who's the characters in the history, who are the men and women who carried on this amazing project of the Mongol Empire. So I really wanted to do both. But of course, in terms of writing craft, it was very hard and it took me a lot of time. Maybe writing the book itself, I'm not speaking about research, took me maybe 2 years, but I was always discussing with other historians. And also, I was very happy to discuss with historians who are not specialized in the Mongol Empire. So I had to get their interest. So I had to explain to them. And when they said, Marie, I can't understand, it's not clear. I was like, okay, I need an example. I need a name. I need something concrete. So the whole process was such. And indeed, not easy, but super exciting.
Right. And it kind of shines through because the people that you write about, they come through the pages of the book. One person who occupies the early part of the book, the founder of the empire, Genghis Khan, you also go into great detail about his leadership style and how he was anointed to be this great successor. But one specific thing that emerges towards the conclusion of the book, you write about a 250-year-old empire by the time it starts disintegrating. How did this moving empire, as you describe it, because it was a mobile empire, keep its memory alive? I mean, they are great writers, which is also something that comes out from your book. But Genghis Khan was pretty well removed by the time we come to the middle part of the Horde. And the way they look at memory, the way they look at unification is a very interesting aspect that comes out through the pages of your book. So, could you shed some light about Genghis Khan, the man, as people saw him around him, especially his eldest son, who was not even his son. But by the time the empire or the Horde comes to an inevitable end, Genghis Khan, the myth, who carries on even today a legacy which perhaps very few people in history have.
Yeah, well, that's absolutely true. This legacy is amazing and it's very hard and interesting at the same time to work on it. So my point was, of course, I have to start with him because everybody knows that Genghis Khan. I have to say what, according to the sources, what we know as historians. And also I was is a very interesting character because he's, on one hand, he goes toward tradition, he used what already exists, right? But at the same time, he's a very creative person. There's a lot of innovation at his time, right? So I was super interested in seeing both, how they, like even maybe sometimes the two process challenge one another. So how do you do with the tension of keeping on with tradition, but having to face new challenges? So I saw he was super interesting in that sense. Also, I have to say that my point was really to show that Mongol Empire is a very collective power. So even at the time of Genghis Khan, you cannot explain everything through him. He's a key figure, but there are also a lot of key figures around him. Ögedei, so that like the generals in the army, but also the administrators from Central Asia, for instance, but also his wife, Berthe, and other women in his, it's almost like a political team around him. And all these people carried on the project. And I think that this collective aspect was the one actually that excited me the most. I thought that's super interesting, and he explains the legacy. When Genghis Khan is, passed away in 1227, it's just the beginning of the story. In fact, even the conquest, they would be carried on by certainly sons, grandsons, but also other people, other Mongols and nomadic people who want to carry on the project. So I thought we already have made, we historians, interesting biographies of Genghis. But what is interesting is statecraft. What is this empire? What is inside it? What is a mobile empire? So how come in the Golden Horde, the Mongols are still so strong in the mid-14th century and even in the 15th century when we think the empire is over, but there's some legacy still there. And it's more than a legacy. I mean, it's still there. It's like the big political model that will last until 16th century. Then there's a time become different in the 16th century, but then, and the legacy changed and transformed, but still. So Genghis Khan is himself, the man, but he is also, as you say, myth, what other people made of him. How his successors like transform his figures to, sort of bolster their endeavor, and then like found energy in this figure of Genghis Khan, which is still a very energetic figure today, right? Which is super interesting to see that. But things, many things happened since 16th century, obviously. So I think my point was also for Western audience to say, okay, Genghis Khan existed, is a real historical character. Is not a myth in the beginning. It's imaging, we have information, we have sources, historical sources. As a historian, that's the first thing I have to do. Then my interest, more intellectual interest, was to show, okay, this is not only about him. This is also very much about, a collective group of people call themselves Mongols, but there are also other people who sort of benefit from the empire and help transformation of this, a credible new state, kind of state. So that's why I start with Genghis, but I move to, especially the lineage of his eldest son, Zöchi. And it's very much about how this lineage transform what we call Russia today.
Right. The reason I asked this question is because and that's a question that I'm going to come to later in, but there's a very interesting statement that you made, or rather, when you are translating from the sources, when Jochi is being given his own ulus, and I think making all of this clear for the non-specialist at the start is one of the key things that makes this book interesting, because you don't have to hunt for the index. It's right there at the start. You have the key to the map, as it were. There's a very interesting thing that you write, and you say that Genghis Khan, in this collective fashion, divides his Mongols into different sons and different keepers, and then you kind of postulate about the eldest son being very far away from the territory and so on and so forth. And so Joshi is this favored son in a way, though I think historical sources put it that he was the son of an enemy of the great Khan. This use of his Mongols is a very interesting thing. In a collective society, how do you then end up with this notion that these people working with him are his people? And how is it different from feudal ownership structure that was happening at that point in Europe?
Yeah, well, thank you. This is really important point. So first, I have to say regarding the eldest son, my point. So I tried to read the sources and put aside like all legends and everything. So what I understood is, first of all, for during the life of Genghis Khan, certainly it's his eldest son. So his eldest son is very important. He's not the only one who counts, but I think in the beginning, it's clear he's supposed to be maybe his successor, or in any case, he received the most important territories to conquer, like the north of Eurasia. I explain in the book why this territory is important. It's like Siberia. So people today think, ooh, wow, it's just snow and wind and why? But no, it's fur trade. Fur trade is the most luxurious trade. It gives all the wealth. It's much better than all sorts of trade. So that's what I wanted to show. And also there's something else. Jochi was in charge with the most important nomadic people. You mentioned that Genghis enemies who might have been, one of them might have been Jochi's father. Well, I have to say, in any case, well, we don't know, right? And we'll never know exactly. But in any case, Genghis never shown any distance with his son. He always acknowledged him as his own biological son. So I thought that let's stick to this. For Genghis, clearly it's his son, whatever happened. So that's one thing. But at the same time, those enemies were very powerful people living in the forest, especially the market people, nomadic people. They were given by Genghis to Jochi. So that's super interesting because the people who were supposed to be the strongest enemies, they are integrated in the empire once they have been conquered. And also they have been put in charge. Jochi has been put in charge and is supposed to lead them. So I think it's a very interesting way to absorb enemies, which is something that we have to understand as it's a phenomenon that we don't know today. Today we are not able, any society in the world is not able to absorb as the Mongols did before. I think one of the reasons is Mongols were very few people. They need more people. More than territories, they need people. And you clearly see in sources, even under Genghis Khan, that territories, great. But if you don't have people, it means nothing. Imagine a time when there's not so much technology like today. So if controlling empty spaces, what for? It makes no sense. So the idea is more to get people into the society. And the first people who count for the Mongols are not sedentary people, from Iran or China. They are nomads, because nomads are very strong. It means strong army, but it means also people who can be absorbed more easily because it's same way of life, same way of communication. So it makes sense to start with them. And in the very beginning, so already in the early 1220s, Genghis integrated those market enemies into his own people. And so he decided to put his son, so especially Jochi, in charge to help them to build their own loyalty. Because, you cannot just force people to believe in a leader, right? You have to show that this leader is able. It's not only about blood. It's about being able to rule and to conquer, or also to administrate in a fair way. And that's when things become interesting, because apparently Jochi at some point failed. He failed in Central Asia, being probably not able to conquer quickly some cities, and to being able to be a good diplomat, which is also very important for Genghis. You don't need to be only a warrior. You need to be clever enough to talk and to convince people to submit. Is always better than to force them to submit, right? So then, there was this problem with Jochi, but his son Batu will take over, and Genghis will just really give Jochi's succession to Batu. So the lineage from the eldest son remain after that always super strong and maintain this heritage from Jochi's period. In my book, I really wanted to show, on the one hand, where Mongols were successful. When it works, it's good to show. But when there were problems and tensions and difficulties, it's also super interesting to show. Because then that's how you understand the reality of things, right? Nothing is super easy. So this whole myth of, the Mongols, they conquered the world like this, and no, it's a lot of work, So I was happy to show that work, and the process of it.
Right. It comes across, as I said, because my conception was that there was the wind from a part of the world which went, conquered half the world and then disappeared. That's not the case. In fact, I'm going to quote you from page 55. Although you have just spoken about it, but this was something that I really wanted to understand. On page 55 of your book, you write, Chinggis responds to the murder of his merchants. I'm talking about the Khwarizmi Empire and what Muhammad did when Muhammad sent a trade caravan from the Mongols. He murders them, and then he murders the ambassadors. You write, it was a classic example of the Mongol psychological warfare. The Mongol custom was to exchange in a ritualized exchanges with their adversaries before battle. This starts off a long period. I mean, in the sense that it brings to the fore the disturbances within the kinship, the family structure, the army of the Mongols. And finally, as you just said, it culminates with Joshi, who was by that time the heir to Chinggis. But then Chinggis realizes that he's not a great diplomat, he's not a great leader. So he then loses favor and then is given an empire. But what I want to understand is how much of this great psychological warfare was utterly new to the world, as in it had not been tried out? And second, how much of this contributed to the stealth war of the Mongols? Because they had, if I might use the word PR, before PR was invented, they had a PR. If the Mongols were coming, then you are about to lose your territory was a foregone conclusion. But this episode, as you show in the book very clearly, had Muhammad's fighters, generals, actually taken advice, they were in with a chance of actually winning it. And the Mongols won it just by the skin of their teeth, if I may.
Yeah. Well, thank you very much. I mean, that's exactly the point I wanted to address. When I started working on the Mongol Empire and Genghis Khan's period, the question I always had was, what was the motivation to conquer the world? Why would they go for conquest? And there's, of course, not one explanation. There's not just one reason. So as a historian, I like to say, okay, look at context, right? So just put things into context and see, because when they invaded Central Asia or China, or when they went to the West, they were each time different reasons. Maybe some like general motivation, and I will come to this, like trade, but still, each time negotiation failed, something happened, and then it leads to a conquest. So in the case of Central Asia, and more specifically, so the Khwarezmian Empire and Muhammad, it's great because we have a lot of documentation. So we really can get into details and how it started, what happened. And I think this campaign it gives us like some keys to understand the functioning of the Mongol, Genghis Khan, but also of the Mongols more generally. So first of all, I figured out that each time Genghis Khan become more like stronger, the Mongols become stronger, they renegotiate their relationship with the external world, right? They renegotiate with the neighbors. And what do they renegotiate? Mostly trade. It makes sense. Today would be the same. You're a stronger state. You renegotiate your trade contracts. You make it better for you. So this trade exchange is super important because it gives you an idea of who's stronger. And so it gives you an idea of, how states or power envision its relationship with the external world. So in the case of the Mongol, you see really this expansion idea. We want to trade more. We want to trade farther away. We want to trade up to the Abbasid Empire. We want to go to Samarkand and Bukhara and work on, have our own traders there. So I tried to show in the book that violence is not only on the military field. It can be, in a way, in the economic relationship, right? So indeed, when the Mongols send a huge caravan of more than, 200 probably traders with a lot of money, a lot of sponsors, a lot of capital, then it's for the Khwarezmian state is like, what's happening? It's really for them, it's mean a huge new power coming into their own economy, right? So it's, in a sense, I wanted to show that Muhammad was not that stupid ruler that we sometimes, described in the sources. I wanted to show that he understood there's some danger here with the Mongols. But it's super interesting to see that the danger started with economics, not with military, encounters really. Then, so Muhammad blocked the traders, and this means war, clearly, for Genghis Khan and the Mongols. And then the whole process of conquering this part of Central Asia started. which is also a process I show in the book could take a lot of time for in terms of preparation. It's not like the Mongols are excited people who decide, let's go on war. No, they think for 1 year, 2 years, sometimes 3 years, they prepare. Do we have enough horses? Do we know the terrain? So they send also scout troops to figure out, like Central Asia is is very different area, right? They need to know. So they prepare themselves a lot. So they look forward also, they think about the future. And that's also another point that I think is important to understand for the conquest. The Mongols in Central Asia, especially, they don't go there to raid. It's not like raiding expedition. They want to build up an empire. They want to administrate. That's why the whole negotiation process is super interesting, because when they come to cities, before attacking them, they try to convince people, as I said, to give up. And they try to sort of build up some sort of contract with them, which are really harsh contracts for the citizen, obviously, because new taxes and, new powers, so scary, certainly. But at the same time, there's a door for negotiation before really going on the battlefield, which sounds kind of modern in a way, I think. And in any case, it gives us another idea of the Mongols as warriors. So these negotiation aspects show us also that what the Mongol wants is not to exterminate all those people. What they want is more taxpayers. They want to have a stronger state. So they want more citizens, and in a way, and it's clearly expressed by Genghis Khan, when you win over a city, when a real conquest is a conquest where you don't have to fight, when you don't have to destroy. Because if you destroy too much, you destroy your own, your own assets, right? And that's what happened with Zochi. Zochi was not able to take, especially important cities in Khwarezmian cities, they were really destroyed, and Genghis was very unhappy with the result, because it's like, I would say in French, to put a knife in your foot, it's like not the idea. So I think working on some very precise examples, we understand better what they had in mind, and we understand better also how, things develop afterwards. So that's mainly what I want to say.
Thank you. It kind of makes it very, very clear. And then now we close the chapter on Genghis Khan very politely as one can, and get to Jochi Khan. And then Jochi Khan, and he's predeceased by the time in 2026 you have this very poignant description that he's called by Genghis Khan and he can't make it. When somebody tells Genghis Khan that, oh, he's hunting and he's avoiding it, so he passes away. And then 1227, Genghis Khan also passes away. After that, we have Batu Khan, who comes in. And he is one of the most important characters that you are able to bring to life. Reading this book, and I think it becomes very clear that he's perhaps one of the greatest people that we don't know anything about. And his general, both of them put together, are quite a thing. Tell us how he differed from both his predecessors in empire building, because he has a very interesting way of looking at empires and the politics. And also, if I might have your comment, there's a quasi-constitutional system that he puts into place. That becomes very clear when one is going through your book. Would it be right to say that in some ways he was far ahead of what Western Europe at that point was looking at, and also civilizations like China and India? Could you hear me? I think there's some internet issue.
The connection was weak. Sorry. Yeah.
Okay, I'm so sorry. Did you get my question, or do I need to repeat?
Half of it. So it's about Batu Khan, right? And how what he changed, or in which way was a new kind of ruler
and the quasi-constitutional setup that he puts into place.
Yes. Yeah, thank you. So Batu is really like the founding character of the Golden Horde. He's super interesting because, as I said already, he knew Genghis, his grandfather, of course, and he was put in charge by Genghis himself. So he really has no problem in terms of legitimacy. But he's also very interesting because he's part of this big movement of conquest toward the West, right? So they went up to Hungary for people who just discovered this story. They went up to after the Hungarian king, and basically they stopped taxi today. Batu decided, so around 1240, 1442 to stay in the what we call the Kipchak Steppe. So it's southern Russia today, in between, imagine it's in between Lower Volga and up to the Don River and almost up to the Black Sea. So this whole area, it was a very good area for nomads before Mongols, especially the one we know as Kipchak or Kuman, was actually became under Batu the center of this new golden horde, like this new Mongol power in the area. So it's very interesting to see that Batu decided to stay there and not to go back to Mongolia. That's the first really amazing thing that happened. And it's the first time that such an important descendant of Genghis Khan decided really to to stay and build up something in the Western steppe. So I started working on it. So obviously the Mongols, they brought up some institutions. So I mentioned like some council, like Ögedei, so some collective institution. They also have the Tumen, the organization of the army, which came from, Genghis Khan time and even earlier time. But they had to adapt themselves. It's Western steppe. It's different. Climate is a bit different. It's very flat country. So even the landscape is different. It's full of rivers, large rivers. You cannot cross during summer. It's like no way you will cross them during summer. So during winter, when it's frozen, you can cross, and they became like huge avenue, like roads. It's super practical, like for merchants and caravans. So Batu and his people really had to harness this new territory and make it their own. So I was very interested in working on this, how they adapt themselves and how they change the relationship with the outside world there. So on the one hand, they start dealing in a very interesting way with the Russian principalities, who are part of their new subject and who are very important new subject for the Mongols. Although they are tiny people, considering that for Mongols, of course, nomads are more important. And also, of course, Islamic community from Central Asia are much, much richer, much stronger in, all sorts of ways. So, but then there are those Russians in the north. They participate in the fur trade. So it's interesting. So they start to build up, they start to create a very interesting area in which there are a lot of doors toward the outside world. There are doors to the west. There are doors to the north. There are doors to the Caucasus, to the Islamic Central Asia. And that's where Batu also start to sort of implement this very interesting politics of being open with the neighbors. If you don't fight anymore, okay, you start trading and you open up, some doors, but you can close them if you prefer, like to control the access of the state. And also Batu starts being a very liberal ruler, paying a lot for merchants who would come with super luxurious goods to his own courts. So he understood, and probably people with him understood, that they had to make this Kipchak Steppe, and especially Lower Volga, a new center. But for that, they really had to make themselves known as, for instance, rich ruler who can pay traders from far away, accommodating people. So they start building settlements also, although they remain nomads, of course. So under Batu, you really said this is a very clever way of developing something new in a new land. And I found it really fascinating, as I didn't expect that. I thought, okay, Batu period, I'm going to talk about conquest. And suddenly I realized with sources and everything, no, actually it's a very peaceful time, the time of Batu in the Kipchak Steppe. And we can see at least 15 years of peace, and people also probably became prosperity became, and for nomads, it was a good time. So this time of peace, I think it's important to consider that it's not a constant state of war in the Mongol Empire. Even at the time of Genghis Khan, you do war sometime when the season of war is winter, but you don't do war in summer. If you have no other option, you have no other option, buddy. So that's also another myth I wanted to change at least in the Western mind, this idea that, nomad, they make war all the time. It's war states. It's a war. It's all about that. And I was, showing the sources. I'm sorry. There are a lot of moments where it's enjoying life, it's drinking fermented mare milk, it's doing politics, is doing discussions, something else. I thought it was super important to give a more complex image of the Mongols.
Which you managed to do. One specific thing that I wanted you to comment on, because we are now talking about Batu Khan, and you just said that Batu Khan took his conquest machine, for lack of a better word, all the way to Hungary. Today, in today's political climate, you have the Hungarian Prime Minister Viktor Orban, who lays claim to being of a Turkic origin. It's an iconoclastic thing which is not based in history, but in some way, when you write about and you start the book, and there is a sort of a thing where you point out that the Russians are trying to sideline the importance of Mongols in their country, but then you have the Hungarians who are jumping up with joy, and they've even joined the Organization of Turkic States. Your comment as a historian on this marginalization in one country and forced manifestation in another country.
Yeah, I understand what you mean. I mean, also, let's say that Hungary is very interesting place when you look at the Mongol Empire, because it's where it's the border of the Mongol Empire. It's where it ends. So it makes sense on the ecological basis because it's the end of the steppe in a way. But also I was happy to show in my book that there were a lot of strong relationship between the Hungarian kingdom before Mongols with Kipchak certainly, but then after too. And I was keen to show that the Mongols and Hungarian people, like they knew each other. It's very important for me to show that there are more connections than we expect. I did the same with when I worked on the Russian Principality. They know it's not because they live in the same place because nomads live with nomads and, settlers live in villages and cities, but they have to communicate. And the Mongols always welcome their subjects or neighboring rulers to their camps to spend a lot of time with them. So they communicate. Also, I work on how they communicate in terms of languages. And it's true that Turkic languages are very important at the time of the Mongols. Kipchak language, but also a language we cannot put a name on it. We know it's the kind of Turkic language, but, it's a way to communicate. So I think it's important to also see that at that time in 13th, 14th century, people speak several languages. It's not like, today we try to speak some English when we are from France, for instance, but we are weak in languages today if we compare with medieval times. We have a lot of anecdotes and sources when you see people speaking 3, 4, 5 languages, writing in different script as well. So I think the connection between Turkic people and Mongol people are very, very strong. And it's super interesting to see that very often in situations described in sources, they don't have problem to communicate. They just probably, they spoke both languages and they have no problem just to understand one another. So certainly Hungarian kingdom was more like closer to Kipchak people, maybe more earlier link with Turkic. But then when Mongol came, it's not like a total change. This nomadic envisioning of power and way of life that Hungarians knew already. So I would say that in a way it makes sense that even Hungarian people today stress their connection with this Turkic past. At the same time, also happy to promote the term Mongol, which we have to understand is a political term in the 13th, 14th century. You can be a Mongol and be also from Kipchak origin or any other origin. I would even say in some ways, some Persian people from that time, even some Genoese traders working for the Mongol and being really part of the empire, really part of the state, transform themselves, right, into Mongol in a way, right? You understand? So the use of Mongol is at that time is different from today. It's not like a nationalistic term. It's different. So I'm happy to stress that and also to show how Eastern Europe and Central Europe was connected to the Mongol Empire, dependent on Mongol Empire actually, which maybe would not please Orban today.
That's a fascinating point. So we now get back to Batu Khan. And in your book, I'm at the point where Ögedei, the second Khan, has passed away. And he has this opportunity, if he really pushes it, to become the Khan, but he lets it go. He wants to concentrate on his part of the kingdom. There's a very interesting thing which your book kind of points out. So when Batu Khan is trying to conquer Russia, they don't have roads and rivers are frozen. So they use the frozen river system to kind of get into it and use that. they use a lot of Chinese science. So they use the early part of the gunpowder. So they're very innovative in this part of the world. How did this science technology flow from one part of the family, or rather the empire, to the other part of the empire? Because later on it breaks down.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Actually, that's why it's good to do micro history, as we said, because this technology is, how can I put that, carried on by people engineers, people who coming from some of them from China, but also from Tangut, also we think Tangut Empire. They know a lot about siege warfare, so different type of warfare. And the Mongols were very keen to integrate this new technology in their army, because when they came to Central Asia and then after that to Russian principalities area, and then Hungary, of course, they have to face cities and fortresses. And so that's interesting. On one hand, you see how this absorption. So I mentioned the Mongol absorption of people when I mentioned Dochi and Genghis enemies, right, in the armies, but they also absorb technologies since the very beginning. And they, of course, do this by hiring people in their administration. So they hired, if you have some skills, you're good in language, I don't know, you're good in siege warfare, you're a good engineer, or you're good at trade, or you know how to count, and you speak, I don't know, or you know how to raise, or you know how to organize tax collection, then Mongol government is interested. Then you have the chance to be hired and get a good position. So not to be like a slave for the Mongol, just to really have a seriously good position. And that's also showed how those people would be convinced to work for the Mongols. We have cases where you see it doesn't work, but there are a lot of cases where you see it works. And that's how technology was transferred already at that time, the early 13th century, to the West, from East to the West. And I think that this movement of technologies going back and forth from East, West, West, East, this will continue up to late 14th century, or let's say at least to mid 14th centuries when, things change. And that's also the way, I use this term of mobile empire, or we can say nomadic, but mobile is interesting because in this Mongol Empire, there's so much mobility for people, for also caravan and traders, herds also, but also, as we said, technologies, and also we could say arts as well. And, craftsmen would be moved from a place to another. So all this change, it's super interesting, and this never happened at this scale before. That's where the Mongols are different from previous very important nomadic empires. We've heard of the Hun, we've heard of the Scythian, I don't know, we've heard of many empires who sort of started from nomadic, background and build up empire. But the scale of the Mongol Empire is just amazing. And the way they successfully put people together, like put their forces together. So they forced Central Asian, like scientists also to work. They forced them to work with Han or, Chinese, Northern Chinese, also scientists or artists or craftsmen. They forced them to work together. They even forced, so we cannot talk about Russia for the 13th century. It's better to talk about Russian principalities because you have different, as you know, entities, and they sometimes work together, but some very often fight as well. Mongols forced them to be one block, at least in the north, They really forced them to pay their taxes together, to just be one. And that's the effects of it on the population is super interesting because it creates a forced unity. Because, you have to make deal with your neighbors because you have to pay your taxes together, for instance. So that's, in a way, a positive effect and a very unexpected effect of the Mongol administration. And it works also for, as you said, for technologies, for the army, for how they develop this, special new type of warfare, which after the end of the 13th century, they won't develop anymore because they don't do conquest anymore in the West in the second half of 13th century, right? In the East it continues, but not in the West.
Right. But even in the West and the East, they kind of give up warfare, and largely they become diplomatic empires. You have this. So after Batu passes away, his brother Berke comes on the throne. And this is the time when the friction between different parts of the Chinggis lineage starts showing up. So you have this entire thing about the southern road and the northern road, where you talk about the Silk Road, which is essentially that this part, the Golden Horde, the Horde, comes into direct conflict with the Ilkhanates, who are also successors to Genghis Khan. And tell us, because when you describe the entire thing, there is a huge role that diplomacy plays, which when we think about the Great Horde, or when we think about the Mongol Empire, diplomacy and diplomatists is not the first word that comes to our mind. So tell us a bit about it. How did this develop? What the problem was?
Yeah, absolutely. So during Berkeley time, so really, let's say around the 1260s, this new part of the empire developed in the south and basically centered on the old Abbasid territories. So it's what we call the Ilkhanate, right? And actually it's so around this figure, very key figure, who of course had this conflict with Berkeley. So they had a war, a real war, but this war just lasted a very few years. And then after this war, they will remain in like not peaceful terms really, but not war terms. And they will renegotiate their relationship after, all the time. And that's when diplomacy becomes important because they also want to both powers. So let's say, to make it simple for the audience, that you have the Golden Horde, so it's the north, and it's basically so the Russia today up to, of course, Ukraine, and even up to almost the Byzantine Empire. And then you have the south, so it's really centered around Baghdad area, but also Persia is part of it, and the other important center is Southern Caucasus and Eastern Anatolia. So that's the core area of Ilkhan. Both of them have a very good, how can I put that? Like, it's easy for them to connect with the West. It's easy for them to connect with the Italian Mediterranean area, let's say, okay, which is very dynamic in terms of trade and all. So they compete. But then, super interestingly, they won't compete so much by fighting, really, on the battlefield. They will compete differently by dragging in traders and trying to build up some new contract with all those merchants coming from the West. And they will also compete for their building up two different roads. It's not just one road, right? It's like a more itinerary. It's like when we say Silk Road, sometimes we have this, my students think one big road. No, it's just a number of roads that intermingle, but that are controlled by a power. So in the north, in the Golden Horde, they control the northern road and they developed it. This road goes from, actually, it can start even in Venice, Genoa, any place in Europe. Then it goes through the Mediterranean Sea, up to the Black Sea, through the Straits, Bosphorus and Dardanelles as we know them today. So it goes across the Byzantine Empire, Black Sea, and then Crimea, and then enter through Azov also area, enter the Golden Horde. And then it's a steppe road. Also, you have to cross rivers, but that's a whole road that goes up to Mongolia. And this road, Northern Road, is like the most important, I would say, legacy of Batu and Mongol Khan after him. So of the Jochi, they really build up this road. They put so much effort into making it safe enough for traders. They also show how Italian, for instance, how they can sell well in the Khan's camp, for instance, how they can sell their goods well. They also develop a very complex monetary system, how you use coins where. So they also develop on the market a weight system, a weight conversion system. You have your own conversion system, and then you want to weight your goods or you weight the money. There are people watching from the state, helping the traders not to be cheated, on that. So they develop the whole thing around this road, the whole trade connection. In Khanid, they would do the same with the south. The difference is, so this road in the south passes through Tabriz today, and then goes to Baghdad also, but then also to Hormuz. And then there's a part of it, which is important part, which is sea road, and then it goes up to China. The thing is, the Ilkhanid are more trouble to control their own road to make it safe for traders. And there also the problem of the sea road, which sometimes can be scary for traders. And you cannot control the sea, right? You can control, it's like, okay, if you have a land road, in a way, sometimes there's bad weather, but in general, you can survive bad weather on a land road, right? But on sea, if there's a real big storm, it's like you lose everything. So the geologists were very good at showing the northern road has more stability and it's safe compared to the southern road. So this competition between the two parts of the Mongol Empire, northern part and southern part, actually super interesting because it triggered development of trade, development also of new technologies. Like it has in a way there's something healthy in it. So, and it was interesting for me to show another type of challenge and competition, which is not a war one. It's a kind of economic war in some ways, but yeah, still they respect one another. So in that sense, all which is we call diplomacy, like how you welcome a diplomat in the nomadic camp, how you arrange things for foreigners. This is key because you have to welcome them and to make them feel comfortable. Because then what happens is they speak among themselves. The Genoese or the Venetian, they will talk about themselves about how, well, I went to the Golden Horde and I was, had this great moment and I felt safe and I have no such problems that I've had in Tabriz, for instance. So then the Mongols really perfectly understood how reputation works for trade relationship and in terms of economics, right? Reputation is key because people, they won't, it's too risky. They won't even try. So today reputation is important, but of course today we have other channels, to communicate and to build up one's reputation, one state reputation. But it's super interesting to see how they did it at that time, how they built up their own reputation to make themselves known, to the outside world.
Thank you. Since this will be an interesting conversation, we are about to hit the hour mark. So last two questions, one long question, one comment for you, and then we open it up for people to take questions and answers. So you just said something very interesting, that what we refer to as Russia today was just coming up. It was several different Russian principalities. In fact, what later on became Muscovy was a creation largely of the Mongols. And this becomes very interesting through the lens of this one character who is like a minor character in your book, the Monkey Temur. I hope I'm getting his name right. You talk about the ruling system that the Mongols created for the Russian people, and they co-opt the society. So they co-opt the elites. They also co-opt the churches. But in all of this, an interesting feature was that after Batu Khan, the rulers were all Muslims. So tell us how this contradiction was solved, because I think it was the only area in the world where the Muslim and the Christians did not go to war with each other.
That's super interesting thought. The relationship between Mongol and religion and the way, so they developed so it's known for wider audience as a Mongol toleration, but I show in my book how much more it is, we should call it like imperial, really it's imperial policies, like everybody has a right to have her own religion and practice and rituals, as long as it doesn't endanger the Mongol power. So you still have to be loyal and respect the power, but then otherwise your religion is your problem. So it rings a bell for our modern society, right? It's super interesting. Now, of course, the Mongols also consider that religious elites are important. They should be protected, because if you are mullah, if you are a sheikh, if you are a priest, Christian priest, also, or maybe there are also Taoist, Buddhist, or Jewish, important characters. You need time to practice your religion, which means to pray. You need time to develop, your spirituality. So these people, if they can prove their status, would be allowed they would be exempted from taxation, the main one at least, and they would be also exempted from military conscription, which is super important because it means that these religious communities start to develop under the Mongol and sort of flourish in an amazing way, just right after the conquest, very quickly. because they don't pay the main taxes. They can develop themselves. Nobody bothers them the way they make their rituals. They can wear the clothes they want. They can put their hair the way they want. And this maybe sounds just normal for today, but at that time, look at the Middle Age, this is just a unique situation. On top of that, Mongol rulers sometimes converted. In the Golden Horde, clearly Islam is super important, as I show in my book. And Berke, first Mongol ruler who converted to Islam already, probably in 1250s, maybe even earlier. And then after that, some rulers were not, like some maybe were Buddhist, or we don't know, but otherwise Muslim, most of them were interested in Muslim religion and probably converted. The notion of conversion at that time, for the Mongols it doesn't mean you have to give up on your belief. It doesn't mean you have to give up on Tengri, the sky god of the nomads. It means you had something to your belief and rituals. It means you had new rituals. So they are super creative in terms of religion. And we even have cases of Mongol princes when we see that some of them seem to be Christian because it said they have been baptized, right? And they protect Christian clergy. But they also have Muslim names, which they use on their coins. And they still believe in Tengus and do the steppe rituals. This is also super unique and very interesting. Why would you have to choose? That's the Mongol idea. It's like, yeah, why not? You can be both. As long as it works. It says just one God anywhere at the end, or one pantheon of God, but it doesn't matter. As long as it works, you don't have to choose. So this, I think, helped a lot. The good relationship they managed to develop with the Russian princes, who were never told to convert to any religion, who could do whatever they want. And the Orthodox clergy flourished under the Mongols. And that's also a very unique situation. And I really wanted to explain this in my work.
Thank you. So a last comment from you, and then we open it up. This has been a fascinating conversation for me. I'm an economist, and I learned a lot about economy too while I was reading about it. When you conclude your book, you kind of try and get into an argument with Ibn Khaldun, because he had a theory about how dynasties have to grow, and you necessarily do not accept that, because as you've demonstrated throughout the book, the people who ruled by the horseback created an empire which was perhaps one of the biggest empires in the world, especially at that point of time. My specific question for your comment would be, at this point of time, to try and understand what impact did the city of the felt wall tents, as you call them, have on the empires after them. And I know I'm asking a thing which is out of the scope of your book, but I would really like your comment, because the Mughals, Tamerlane, who was at that point of time the ruling person, and Ibn Khaldun was in his service in a way. So what this mobile empire did actually teach to the next sedentary empires as they came to be?
Well, yeah, thank you. This is really important. I think what they teach them is the size of the world, and they give them the hope of crazy new trades developments. You can see that from Ibn Khaldun, but you can see that also from the West, where the kingdom of France, they suddenly in 15th century become obsessed with Marco Polo and stuff like that, because they think there are new roads, there are new people, there are lots of important powers in Asia and a lot of possible trades there. So people start to envision the world completely differently after the Mongols. I think one of the reasons clearly is that because the empire was rather open, as I said. You have those roads, people were like welcome inside. You could cross the empire. You would not do it necessarily, but you could do it as a foreigner, which is something also very huge. So I think that people have seen this new world, and they also have seen, they have seen that there's a world beyond Middle East, which is important also clearly for the West, because thanks to the Mongol, we go out of this crusade period when there's a lot of conflict on this, in this area, in the near Middle East. And then people discover there's something behind. So, and we can be good friends also. We can work together with Mongols and then probably other powers. So as like Timur, of course, Tamerlane. So I think that the vision of the world completely transformed. That's the most important legacy. And it's proved by the new maps. new maps appear in 14th century and 15th century. So the way people also envision the world changed completely. And this is really that they have more new expectation for developing their own, trade relations, or, also for scholars, meeting new scholars, going to other cities far away. It's possible. Don't be too afraid of traveling. Like, we can travel, we can try more. It's super interesting. So of course we cannot understand Columbus and all this period without the Mongols, because this is really coming from Mongol period. This, kind of huge energy towards, integrating the world, going far away. And that's this open up of the world. This is really, I would say, that number one legacy.
It has been a terrific conversation, and I hope there were no bad questions. So that is all I can say, and look forward to your next work.
Thank you so much, Professor Rai. I really appreciate your invitation. It was wonderful for me to have this discussion. Thank you for the question. Your question you know my work. And clearly, thank you for reading it. It's also helped me to, think about my next work, which aspect I will develop. And I will certainly continue my work on the Mongol Empire. And
may it come out sooner, and may you join us again for that discussion. And with that said, I'm now going to request Farheen to formally end the session. But thank you so much for doing it, Professor.
Thank you. Thank you very much.